Hi, everyone. Today I am reviewing the book About Our Liturgy, Meaning, History, and Practice by David Kind. The author was, cut off there in the shot, so here it is. Um, Full disclosure, as I start this review, I attend David Kind's church. I've been a member for almost 2 years now. And so you could say I'm a little bit biased, but I think the content of this book is such that there's not much bias that I can really show in the first place. So though you want to take my review with a grain of salt, I don't think it's going to affect much. So this book is exactly what it sounds like. It's simply a run through of Lutheran liturgy, why we do things the way that we do, in terms of the meaning of the liturgy, the history of it, and how it's done. Um, so with that in mind, this book, it's not like a lot of other works I've seen. A lot of other works may be polemical against other forms of worship. They'll say, well, uh, we do this instead of contemporary worship for reasons XYZ, or they might be really theoretical almost as, oh, these are the effects of the liturgy. So, you have a book like Liturgy and Personality by a Roman Catholic author, and it was like that. But this book is much more just, let's run through the liturgy. What is it? Why do we do it this way? That's it. Um, but I should say it's not meant to be polemical. It's not a polemical work, as I said earlier, because that's really it's not something that I think we need to understand why we do things the way that we do. You don't need to understand the liturgy in light of denying the regulative principle of worship, nor do you need to understand the liturgy in light of denying contemporary worship. And even for the aspects of the mass that Luther removed, excised, like Invocation of Saints, you don't need to understand that to understand why we do the things we do right now. It very much stands somewhat on its own in that respect. Um, and so it's it's a bit refreshing compared to other things that I've seen where it's like, I just want to get, the liturgy explained to me. I don't need to know why we do this compared to other groups. I don't need to have an extensive history of every single possible reform. I don't need every single translation that there is. It's not meant to be some really, really advanced work for only high level theologians. It's just meant to be an introduction. And I really appreciated that because um I am not somebody who is incredibly into liturgics. I'm not somebody who's an expert on that. um that's just not my big thing, but I want to understand why we do the things that we do in general. And so when I heard Pastor Kine made a second edition of this, I thought I would buy it and read it and then review it. So as part of that, I should say he didn't never ask me to review this or anything. I told him I would be reviewing it, but he never asked me, and it hasn't influenced what I would say whatsoever. Now, going into the actual contents of this book, I'm going to read the table of contents. Now, it's going to sound like there's a lot here. It really will. But each chapter is only a few pages and only needs to be that much. There's only a total of 159 pages of this book, and the text looks like this. Let me show it. Um, it's not too big. It's not massive. Um, it's something that honestly, if you really wanted to, you could read in a few hours. But I wouldn't really recommend it that way if you want to, contemplate and think about why we do these things. I think it's better not to do it in a few hours. I read it over the course of several days, and I think that was good. But some people may want to take even more time so they can really reflect on the contents of this book. Now, speaking of the contents, here they are. So there's the preface. What is worship? Holistic worship. Who is the church worshiped for? The church is worshiped for. The Catholicity of our liturgy, structure, ordinary, propers, elements of the divine service. And now there are sub chapters, so to speak. The invocation, the confession of sins, the introit, the Kyrie, the Gloria in excelsis, the salutation, the collect of the day, the lessons, the gradual and verse, the holy gospel, the creed, the hymn of the day, the sermon, the offertory, the prayer of the church, the preparatory sentences, the preface and proper preface, the Sanctus, the Lord's Prayer, the consecration, the Pax Domini, the Agnus Dei, the Communio, the distribution, the post-communion canticle, the salutation, benedicamus, and benediction. So that's all just in the section of the ordinaries and propers. And then another section, liturgy, creed, and the life of Christ, the body and worship. I should say liturgy, creed, and the life of Christ doesn't have any subsections. But the body and worship, the ceremonies, the divine service, they have or this chapter sorts has subchapters that are categorized as follows: the sign of the cross, standing and sitting, reverencing, genuflecting and kneeling, processions, chant, silence, incense, hand washing / lavabo, and then finally you have a section on vestments, liturgical colors. There are also a few figures, so to speak, that show how you do what the flow of the liturgy is, the liturgy, creed, and life of Christ, sign of the cross, the significance and use of colors. So, as I said, and I think you can tell just by the nature of the contents, this book is not something really theoretical. It's very concrete. And I think that was really helpful for me. I've been looking for a book like this for a while, actually. Now, to be fair, I just want to say I haven't read Jordan Cooper's Introduction to Lutheran Worship. I think it's called that. So, you could yell at me and say, oh, he wrote one. How could you not? I just I didn't know for a long time that it existed, frankly. I think he wrote it a while back. I could be wrong on that though. Nonetheless, Pastor Kind said to me that he made a second edition. He just kind of mentioned it to me, like, oh, I should get that, um, and talk about it. Now, one thing that was cool about it is that, as I said, it's very much an introduction. When I was reading this, even though I mean I run a YouTube channel about theology, I would like to think that I know a bit. You'd hope if I was running a YouTube channel about theology and writing stuff on it, getting like published and in some locations that I would know a thing or two. But this book wasn't something I thought was too difficult by any means. It really served as an introduction. I discovered that he made a second edition actually on the Feast of the Epiphany, and I had some evangelical friends of mine with me at that service, and we were talking with Pastor Kine, and he said, "Oh, they want to know more about the liturgy," and just gave them copies. So at least in Pastor Kind's mind, he's the author of the book. He said this is good enough to introduce even to someone who's only attended a service of ours once. And I think that does reflect in the contents of the book. I think that's very fair. So this is a book that's not really, really heavy. It's not meant to be something that just, goes into minute details of, well, this is the exact color of the green that you want to use, and this is the extensive history of this practice of ours. No, it'll cover those things in brief. But it's meant to serve as an introduction where if somebody really wants to know more, they could probably read a liturgical manual, or, some kind of history of the liturgy. But this book does do all the things it sets out to do. It will cover, for example, where we find certain practices early on. And really interestingly, it will cover, well, what is the theological reason we do these things? Another thing I really liked about this book is it's not just, hey, we find it in the 8th century. It's pretty cool. So let's continue doing it. No, it actually says, well, here's why we do it at a theological level. Um, and there are times when you're not going to be able to say, "Oh yeah, the sign of the cross straight up in the Bible." Like that's not there, right? But what you can point out, and I think he does, is that it shows um, up really early in the early church, and it confesses the three persons, two natures, and then obviously the cross, right? Um, and it's something that can be patterned in some way after the practices of the church throughout history. And when I'm talking like even during the testamental period, the Old Testament, where you see like sackcloth and ashes, and then the publican in the New Testament beating his breast, where there are these physical practices that you implement into your worship. So you are reflecting your worship in a specific way physically. It's not something purely mental. It's not purely I am contemplating God in some immaterial way. No, you're doing physical things as a reflection thereof. So I think the book covers those kinds of conceptual arguments, so to speak, those conceptual groundings for the various practices we do, and it also covers, where do we find this stuff? So for example, in the section on the sign of the cross, I mean, he covers the fact that obviously Luther did it. We see it, pretty early, and it's been in continual use as part of baptismal liturgy since the 3rd century. Um, he cites Tertullian on it and Hippolytus of Rome. And then he shows also where we do it, and then he shows how to do it too. One of the figures is, how to do it. It's pretty well done. So yeah, it's in detail enough where I think someone's going to have a solid grasp of it. But it's not going to be something where you're some liturgical expert, you're able to teach lectures on this. Nah, it's not what it's supposed to be in my mind. And I think that's what helps it a lot because it's sometimes, for a layman, getting bogged down into the details can be a little annoying and it can, how do I say, discourage you from continuing. It can just get boring. I don't think this book does that at all. I think it's fairly interesting in its own right. And I think it does a good job of keeping the reader involved because it's not, oh, here's 40 pages on this one tiny practice, and here are like the individual, different, very like every single possible variation of it. It's just here's what the practice is, here's some history of it, and this is, why we do it. So with that in mind, I think this book really sets out, or it does everything that it sets out to do. I really liked it, and this is a book I actually hope to use for catechesis. I think one of the biggest shortcomings of modern catechesis, and I don't know if historic catechesis did this, but one of the things I'd like to implement, I don't have any children, but if I were to have children one day, which I would, I hope for, I would actually want to run through this with them at some point to show them why we do what we do. I think it's a shortcoming that a lot of people, they go to church, they're taught correctly things in the small catechism and large catechism, um, but it's not, beyond that. It's just, well, those are the essentials of Christian doctrine, and they don't learn what happens in the liturgy and why we do it. I think it's actually something really important to know. I think it's very valuable to know because I want to see, well, why do we use incense in the church? Why is there a lavabo at ULC? And so on. So I really, really appreciate this resource. I'm gonna give it really 5 stars out of 5. Again, you could say, well, Jared goes to Pastor Guy's church, but as I said, I don't think there's much bias in saying it. It just did exactly what I wanted it to and exactly what it wants to do. Or I should say Pastor Kind, wrote a book that he does what he set out to do. The only thing, sometimes some of the practices, I mean, it's relatively, like, it's not exactly specific to ULC. Like, there are some things in here that maybe your church doesn't do. So for context, ULC follows Divine Service Setting 3, but we don't just follow it strictly, where every single practice we do is in DS3. We do some other stuff. I don't think there's a lavabo in DS3 or any of the settings for that matter. I think there are maybe a few other small practices we do that you don't find specifically in DS3. But overall, most of this stuff is going to be in there in some way or another. And so I think anybody who goes to a liturgical Lutheran church is going to get value out of it. Even applying this stuff, like, ULC, we do DS3 only for a few reasons. I would argue the main one we do it. The main reason is because of the and with thy spirit instead of and also with you. I think Pastor kind of talks about that in this book, actually, as to why we do and with thy spirit. We don't want to say and also with you. To give a brief summary of it, it's basically that and with thy spirit is talking about not simply the pastor in himself, but the spirit that is communicating in the pastor through the pastoral office as an ordained minister. Whereas, and also with you is kind of treating the pastor like just another congregant who has the ability to, do the sermon and consecrate. No, we're trying to show that their pastoral office is distinct in some way. So that's why we do, and with thy spirit, and hence DS3 only. But I think much of this is going to apply to DS1, 2, 4, and, much lesser extent 5. But even for people who are not, Lutheran, so many of these practices are going to be in your church anyway. Like, I don't know any church that's liturgical that doesn't do the Lord's Prayer. I don't know any church that doesn't do some kind of, plea for mercy or Gloria. So with that in mind, as I said before, this book gets a 5 out of 5 from me, and I think everybody should read it. I will insert the link in the description, and I will also say that Pastor Kind has other liturgical resources available. He wrote the Lutheran Breviary, which is really good. I don't use that every single day, but some people do, and it's really, really, really good. We use it at least once a week. I think we use it for Matins and Vespers at ULC, and sometimes I'm able to make those. So whenever I do, whenever I'm there, we use that, and it's a cool resource too. But at the very least, I think everybody should buy this and maybe use it to learn a bit about Lutheran liturgy in terms of its meaning, history, and practice, as the book says. So thanks for watching, everybody, and I hope to hear any comments or questions from you. If there are any questions, the nice thing about reviewing this book, since I know Pastor Ken, is if there are any questions in here that for some reason I'm like, I don't know, I'll just text him and I can get answers straight from the author. So let me know if you have any questions about it. Even if you buy it, you read it, and you ask questions, just, you can comment it, and I'll ask him, and I'll hopefully get you an answer. Thanks again for watching. Bye.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching another Scholastic Lutherans video. If you'd like to support us, you can follow us on Twitter at Gerhard's Ghost, or contribute on Patreon at Scholastic Lutherans. There you'll get access to our Telegram chat and other perks. Links can be found in the description. Subscribe, like, or leave a comment, and have a nice day.